Every day, the dog sat on the empty hospital bed, and at first, no one understood why. The bed had been empty since the dog arrived, but he kept going back to it for hours. Then, a nurse found out the surprising reason for the dog's behavior. Nurse Lucille rushed to the empty hospital room with tears in her eyes. She was on the phone, and the person on the other end was eagerly waiting to hear if she had found the dog. When she saw him in the empty room, she could finally tell the caller that it was okay. They could come to the hospital now. Lucille sat down next to the dog and started petting him. Now she understood why he was there. But why did the dog sit by the empty hospital bed every day? Why was Lucille so emotional? And why was the dog even at the hospital? It was unusual for hospitals, including the one in North Dakota, to allow animals. However, things changed one day when they decided to make an exception for this special dog. The reason must have been very important for the hospital management to agree. About 6 months ago, a black Labrador dog showed up at the hospital in North Dakota. Most people who spotted the dog at first thought he was most likely there for one of the patients or a guest, so they didn't give much thought to the dog's presence at the hospital. Surprisingly, after some time, nobody claimed to own the animal. When it seemed like the owner of the dog was not at the hospital, they decided to kick the dog out and send him back to the street. Their decision was based on the fact that they considered a patient could be at risk of infection due to the presence of the dog. The people in the waiting room didn't take the decision well, as they were glad to play with the puppy. All the people in the waiting room were happy to interact with the jolly black Labrador, including those in severe pain, those who were a bit ill, and the loved ones who came to the hospital with their sick friends or family members. Surprisingly enough, some nurses also fell in love with the animal. The people in the waiting room took it upon themselves to plead with the CEO of the hospital not to send the dog back to the street. They stated that the dog's presence was serving to boost patients' morale. The CEO wanted to object at first, but after having a first-hand experience of seeing the dog play, he couldn't say no. After the CEO agreed to the people's plea, the first thing done was to take the dog to the vet. The animal was thoroughly checked by the vet to confirm if his presence could pose any potential risks. The vet concluded that doing a full checkup once a month would help minimize any infection risk. At the end of the checkup, nothing risky was found in the dog, and the black Labrador became a full-time resident of the hospital. Not long after, the dog was named Joy. He was so called because joy was the feeling he gave to everyone who came across him. Waiting patients were always overjoyed to take the animal for walks, and as a result, the staff never bothered to walk him. The most pleasing aspect was that the health and safety inspectors at the hospital were able to tolerate the dog's presence. Thus, freedom was granted to the black Labrador. Everything seemed perfect with the stray black dog's relationship with the hospital. However, there was one thing that some of the staff viewed as odd about the whole situation. As much as they enjoyed the dog's company, they couldn't keep their minds from thinking about the one thing that was off. The staff of the hospital had trouble keeping track of the dog at all times. They had been facing the same issues since the dog arrived at the hospital. They felt there was always a period each day when the dog seemed to disappear. This period of disappearance always seemed short, but it was something they found strange. After a while of doing nothing about the dog's strange disappearances at that time of day, they became more curious and decided to look into the situation. It took them a few weeks of observing the dog before they found out what they were looking for. On that fateful day, a young boy waiting for his mother in the hospital became sad and nervous. He spotted Joy, the dog, in the waiting room and followed him, feeling cheered up. When the boy's father noticed he was missing, he alerted the staff, who quickly searched for him. They'd found the boy waiting in a hospital room with Joy, who was calmly sitting by an empty bed. The staff was surprised by the dog's behavior. The next day, Joy disappeared again, and a curious nurse found him in the same room, looking at the empty bed. This confirmed that Joy often visited that room, leaving the staff puzzled about why. The room had been empty for a while, and the hospital management had considered renovating it but lacked funds. To understand Joy's visits, the staff locked the room, but Joy continued to sit by the closed door and whimper. Eventually, they decided to keep the door open, believing the dog's actions were not disrupting hospital operations. After all the drama, most of the staff concluded that going to the empty room was what Joy liked, and there were no strings attached to it. However, one nurse felt there was more to his visits to the empty room. The nurse was so curious about the reason behind the dog's actions that he started investigating the situation. Dr. Lucille couldn't believe that the only reason Joy visited the room was that he liked it, so she decided to investigate further. She first asked her colleagues if they had seen the dog doing anything unusual, but no one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. She soon found out that there was indeed more to it. Joy was going to the restroom of the room in question every day, but what he was doing there puzzled Lucille. She had never seen anything like this before, and certainly not with a dog. Every time Joy entered the restroom, she sniffed the auxiliary rods that helped patients balance while using the toilet. After sniffing, she made a strange squeaking sound, which made Lucille wonder if the dog was sad. Joy spent about 10 minutes in the toilet each day, ending with loud barking and crying before jumping onto the empty hospital bed. Lucille was puzzled by Joy's behavior and decided to investigate. That evening, she skipped her usual routine and searched online for dog and strange crying sounds. She found an article about a dog acting weird after its owner died, which reminded her of Joy. The next day, Lucille returned to the hospital and found Joy in her usual spot by the empty bed. With her forensic training, Lucille suspected the dog was picking up a scent from its owner. She went over the frame of the hospital bed that Joy always sat next to with a tissue. She did the same with the auxiliary bars in the toilet. Then she took the wipes to the hospital lab. At the lab, she asked one of the lab technicians if he would analyze the smells and slash or DNA from the tissues as soon as possible. The man said he would finish what he was working on and then immediately start examining the wipes. Lucille left her number so he could call her. Lucille continued with her normal work, but in her mind, she thought only of the wipes and what kind of results the lab technician would come up with. She couldn't wait for the results from the lab. Then she got a call on her work mobile. "Hello, this is Michael, the lab technician. I have the results of the sample from the wipes. We were able to match the DNA to a person, and I think you'll want to know who it belongs to, and more importantly, who owns the dog in the hospital." Lucille's heart began to beat faster. She couldn't wait to hear what Michael had to say. "Of course I want to know," she shouted loudly through the phone. Michael responded, smiling, and said, "Calm down. I'll tell you right away. We compared the DNA to the DNA we have in our database. After about half an hour, we had a match. It's from an 88-year-old man named Samuel Torres. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital here, and he died last month. So she is right after all," Lucille thought, realizing her suspicions had turned out to be true. She asked Michael if he could send her all the man's details to her work email. Michael did so immediately, and Lucille began going through the data. It turned out that the man died on April 22nd of this year. Lucille wanted to look for family members so she could deliver joy to them. Samuel turned out to have lived on a farm for years, so she decided to drive there herself. It was about an hour's drive to the farm. When Lucille arrived, the place looked empty. She knocked on the door, and after a minute, a middle-aged woman answered. "Who are you?" the woman asked. Lucille explained that a dog had been wandering around her hospital for weeks. She said she had been looking into it and found out that the dog probably belonged to Samuel, who lived at this address. "You've got to be kidding me," the woman exclaimed. "Samuel is my father. We took care of him for the last few weeks before he went to the hospital. Because we were at the hospital so much, we couldn't watch his dog as much. Max, that's the dog's name, must have picked up Samuel's scent and followed it to the hospital. But by then, Samuel had already passed away. Max stayed in the hospital and found his owner's deathbed. He is so loyal that he goes to the same room every day." Now Lucille understood why the dog was making those strange noises. He was crying for his owner. Lucille told Samuel's daughter that she could ride with her to get the dog. The woman said she would prefer to drive behind her. Together, they drove to the hospital. Lucille had tears in her eyes when she saw how Max reacted to Samuel's daughter. Wagging his tail, the dog jumped up to her. Lucille had never seen such a loving moment. The woman thanked Lucille for everything, and together with the dog, she walked out.